Coming up in today's video, one of Toronto's elite buildings under fire from the Toronto Star with suspicious transactions that have happened over the last 5 years. We're talking about money laundering, the Russian mafia, fraud, all this juicy stuff coming up in today's video. Let's talk about it. Welcome everyone, Michael Jacobzak. Welcome to the channel. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification button for more great content on Toronto real estate. Now today we're diving into a really crazy story that the Toronto Star and Ryerson investigation and journalism team put together. It's a great article. It's like right out of a movie. I highly suggest you read it. We're going to be talking about today. I'll put the link in the description below. But essentially, it's about what's happened in the last 5 years since inception of the Four Seasons Hotel and Private Residency. Now, when they first launched that pre-sale marketing, units were being listed at $1,350 to $1,500 per square foot, which at the time was a record in Canadian history, not even just Toronto, history. And since then, there's been 101 resale transactions, but 30% of those units have hit a loss when the market has consistently gone up. Now, we're gonna jump into it because there's a lot of details, a lot of juicy details that this article covers, and let's talk about it. Now, anyone who's been following the Toronto real estate market for the last 5 years knows that if you bought into the market, you pretty much made money. It's been a no-brainer. Real estate has been thriving. While that isn't the case when it comes down to the private residence of the Four Seasons, as the 101 sales that have happened, 30% have been at a loss. Now, this isn't abnormal in terms of when you're dealing with markets in the luxury side. Sometimes stuff doesn't go as well as projects have projected, but this isn't the case of what the Toronto Star and Ryerson journalism investigation team has found out, as it's been very suspicious with these sales. So let's dive right into it. Now, the Toronto Real Estate Board has posted that the condo market is up 67% in the last 5 years. Now, when we look at the numbers on the Four Seasons private residence, they've seen an increase 23.9%, which on average is just over $704,000. But the 30 sales that saw a loss, they saw a loss on average about 8.1%, which relates to $253,000. Now, 6 units actually hit over $500,000 out of those 30 sales. It's important to note that these losses have occurred every year up until 2018, and it's affected every aspect from the lower, middle, and higher end units of the Four Seasons private residence. Now, these losses do not include the 26 sales that were transferred from family members were essentially transferred for $0 to $5 in terms of in the land registry office. Now, in the land registry office, some of these units do not include sales tax that were paid, and on average, the article, when they did the investigation, they added the sales tax as well. So although some seem to look like they made money, they didn't when you factor in any sales tax. Now, to better understand what's going on with the losses, the Star dove into the land registry office to see and to try to wrap their head around why people were taking a loss. Because like I said, in a market that's been thriving, it's kind of weird that there's a loss on the books for 30% of these units. Now, what they found was it was very hard to determine who actually owned properties because of how it's set up here in Toronto. Now, when you're talking about world-class cities like Hong Kong, London, New York, and even Vancouver, they've all clamped down on anonymous ownership due to the financial crime that it's a safe haven for people to launder money and store money. So what they found essentially was Toronto is heavily exposed still. Diving into some of the numbers when we're looking at the comparable units, because at some point, yes, people have taken a loss in the last 5 years. to single out buildings to say, 30% of the building took a loss would be kind of weird. The Star dove into comparable units of what they sold. For instance, 1903 sold for a gain of just under $300,000. That was July 30th in 2015. The same comparable unit, 1801, took a loss of over $103,000, and that was just in August 4th. Again, 3704 sold for a gain of over $1 million, and that was June 27th, 2014. The same comparable unit in July 28th, which is a month later, took a loss of just under $600,000. Again, unit 3401 took a loss on July 5th, 2013 for $376,000, and this same comparable unit, essentially right next door, sold in September for $141,000 gain. Now, again, very similar, same floor. Now, the lack of transparency in the land registry office makes it very difficult to trace down 51 of the units that are privately owned by companies. Now, some of these companies are numbered companies, and some of them are even tax haven offshore, have offshore addresses such as Delaware, Malta, Cayman Islands, that are essentially, makes it very difficult to trace where the money's coming from or who it's coming from. Now, what the Star did in the article is they pretty much aired out any public knowledge of people that bought units that essentially, whether they had lawsuits or stuff that was known to the public, they have case by case with what was bought with these people and whether or not they were acquitted or have a back history. They talked about it. So it's really interesting to go through. I'm not going to mention obviously any names, but what they found with a lot of these units that took a loss, some of the stuff that was very interesting was you had people with security fraud and inside trading, family feuds of people borrowing money from companies that were not allowed to. You had private mortgages on some of these units that had 0% interest or interest up to 50%. Now, a history of different crimes, counterfeit money. You had essentially a lot of lawsuits, whether or not people were involved in won or lost, a history of it. You had mortgage fraud, even as far as people affiliated with the Russian mob. So all these things very interesting. And like I said, I highly suggest if you're intrigued with this that you check out the article. It's a really well done article, really detailed article. So kudos to the Star and obviously Ryerson for putting it together. Now in 2016, the United States Treasury Department started tracking shell companies' transactions, and what they found were 25% of cash purchases were flagged suspicious. And what they did, they started in Manhattan and Miami, and then they essentially moved to other hot markets, and they found consistencies. Now, in the UK, the House of Commons banned shell companies for ownership for this reason, and later on this year, BC made policies that anyone buying with shell companies had to expose or label who actually owns the property. So what's left is more and more world cities are closing or making it harder for anyone looking for places for suspicious money laundering. There's only so many places. So Toronto right now is still exposed, which is why the Toronto Star kind of zoned in on the Four Seasons residency specifically, because they found consistency of what's going on the world class stage that's happening here. Now the Star found no illegal activity was found from the Four Seasons, as they have no control over the resale of their units. But as more and more cities clamp down on financial crime, it leaves very few cities left that are still exposed to suspicious behavior with these transactions, Toronto being one of them. And that is it. There you have it. Today's video which was really well done. Like I said, I'm going to put the link in the description. Kudos to the Star and Ryerson for putting it together. Really well done. Love to hear your comments. Do you think this is happening all over Toronto, or is just, one specific to just the luxury market or maybe just specific to the Four Seasons. Love to hear your comments. Like, comment, share. We'll catch you in the next one, guys. Take care.